J Baba, Baba lovers or potential Baba lovers of the future. I'm happy to be here today. Many stories. I actually wrote down a list, and I don't have any chronological order. I'll come up with a few. One of the stories that I like to tell is my time in the military. I was in the Marine Corps, and if you look at me or you know me, you know that I'm not exactly Marine material. I came from a pretty well sheltered background as a suburban boy of fairly well-off parents. And the military was as shocking as I thought it would be, and it was pretty rough for me. I didn't really fit, and I think they knew it from the word go, but I did obey, and so they allowed me to go on through. And boot camp is never comfortable for anybody. And so, with that said, long into my miserable years in the reserves, I was supposed to go to summer camp. And summer camps are 2 weeks in the summertime. And this particular summer, I'd become a Baba lover, not when I started the Marine Corps, but somewhere in the middle of it. And the silence came up, and summer camp fell on the silence. And this was, oddly enough, a silence that Baba had said this would be a silence that could not be substituted. You couldn't go on a fast like you usually could if circumstances didn't allow. No, you had to keep silent. And so I was determined to obey, and to do that, Baba would want me to make it as smooth on myself as possible. And so I was going to have to get the permission of the commanding officer. I was going to have to get a couple of months, maybe 2 or 3 months before we actually went into the summer training. So I knew that I had to talk to this man. And there is a procedure where you can request masks, you can talk to the commanding officer, and I was going to have to go through something like that. And I kept putting it off. I dreaded talking to him. I dreaded the hassle I would go through just to see him, or the ridicule I would take to bring such a subject up with him. I wasn't wrong in that. I think that's exactly what would have happened. But I kept putting it off, and I kept putting it off, and I kept putting it off, and I'm thinking, my God, what am I so cowardly about? I've got to do this, and I really should do it today. There's really no other time. I've got to see this man. So all opportunity just went like sand between my fingers. And at the very end of the day, rather timidly, I approached this commanding officer as he was leaving the building, getting into his car. I think he'd even shut the car door. And I came up to him, Sir, Private Underwood wishes permission to speak to the commanding officer. And I'm sure he was mildly disgusted. He probably think, what the hell now? What do you want? He kind of rolled down his window or something, and I said, I'm requesting your permission to keep silence on the July 10th. It'll fall on the summer camp. And he said, why? And I told him why. And he said, do you have any documentation for this? and I really didn't much. The family letters had suggested that we should all keep silence, and we didn't have an option of being on a fast or anything. But that's not exactly a formal paper. And Mayor Baba wasn't exactly an established religion. He probably never heard of Mayor Baba. And so he thought about it. And that's the best part. And this is what makes me think I did the right thing by being so cowardly as not to approach him until the last minute. Because if he had been in his office, he would have been surrounded by sycophantic people who would have loved to have the opportunity to run interference for him and get this private first class out of his office who was making such a silly nuisance. So he had to listen to me. There was nobody else but me and him. And for that reason, it worked. And it would have been much more difficult otherwise. But he listened and he said, well, tell me this, Underwood, if I were to order you to speak on that day, would you speak? And I said, no, sir. And that's, you're basically telling your commanding officer you would potentially disobey a direct command. That would have put the people in his office up in arms. They'd have been shouting at me and everything, but that's all speculation. We don't really know what they do. Point being that he heard it, and he didn't get upset. He thought about it. And he said, well, Underwood, if you were needed to speak, like if by doing so you might save somebody's life or something like that, what would you do? And I had thought about this. And I thought, well, I think Bravo would probably allow that. But I said, I don't know, sir. And that was left at that. Finally, he said, okay, if it's okay with your platoon sergeant, it'll be okay with me. So the next drill was a month away, and at that time I had the opportunity to speak to the platoon sergeant, and he said, have you seen the major about this? So it was kind of a hot potato. Neither one of them really gave me a definite permission, and neither one of them gave me a definite no, you can't. So I went into the silence. 2 months later, I was down at Camp Lejeune with my unit. The guys who would have probably given me the most trouble got transferred out, thank God. And came the evening of the silence. It was July 9th. And I had duty in a communications hut till about 11:30 at night. I had been at the sort of the end of the alphabet, and they had run out of tents. So we had what was called shelter halves. I carried half, and the other guy carried half, and we snapped those shelter halves together and made a tent out of them. They had run out. I didn't have a shelter half. So I didn't have a tent buddy. So what to do with me? Well, they had a kind of a circus tent, a much larger tent where the non-commissioned officers had cots set up. And that's where they said, you sleep in there. So there I was with all the non-commissioned officers. 11:30 at night, the non-commissioned officers had already gone to bed, and I finished my duties, and I said something to one guy. I said, I'll be keeping silence tomorrow. And he says, what do you mean? I told him. He said, for how long? I said, all day. He said, 24 hours. So he is the only person who really knew. I think everybody else I had ever discussed it with 2 months before had forgotten about it altogether. And there was also no flashlight issue. So I stumbled out into the dark and found my way to the non-commissioned officer's tent. Very little light. Went into the tent, rolled out down my sleeping bag on the ground, and I'm next to this non-commissioned officer on a cot. And it's pretty dark in there. I mean, it was dark outside. It was even darker in the tent. And I'm going about my business. It's probably 12 o'clock now. The silence, didn't have a watch, didn't have a flashlight. Silence was going to begin or had begun any minute by that time. Didn't know for sure. Guy hears me and he says, "Who's there?" And I consider myself to be on silence at that time, and I'm stuck. I have to answer him. And I chose to just go about my business, unroll my sleeping bag. He'd look over, he'd see what I was doing, he'd pay no attention to it, he'd go back to sleep, and everything would be just fine. No, who's there? And I knew I couldn't, there's nothing I could do, but I tried to figure out a compromise, and the only compromise was that I made the sound and that was the mistake. It was stupid because it confirmed to him that there was indeed somebody there. And this time he got him up, got him excited a little bit, and he said, "Can't you speak?" And he can barely see me. And there's a little tiny hole in the tent. A little bit of light came through to form a little spot on the ground. And he said, "You can't speak?" So I start writing. And he says, "You want to write?" So we got a piece of paper, and he didn't have a flashlight either. He had a cigarette lighter. He lit the cigarette lighter, and I wrote out the message, "I am keeping silence in honor of Mayor Baba's silence." And he read it, and he says, "How long are you going to do this?" And I go, he says, 12 hours, 24 hours. Okay, Underwood, go back to sleep. So, problem over with, but I had compromised, or might have compromised the silence. On with the program. The next morning, they have left the tent early, and I am the last one to leave the tent. So I pack up my stuff and walk out into the bright sunlight. And this guy comes up to me, and the first thing he says is, "I hear you're keeping silent." And when I did that nod, he did a double take, like, "Oh, you really are keeping silent." So, yeah, he was quite shocked. And then it went all over the camp. Everybody knew about it. It was a cause of celebration. One of the things that had worried me more than getting the permission was the attitude of my fellow Marines, because they're a rowdy bunch, and they could very easily take it upon themselves to make me talk. And a lot of them would have. This, like I said, the really rowdy ones had been shipped out to another duty. So people took it very positively, and they were happy for it. And it went around the camp, and it affected the regulars who were also working with us. And it was just fun. The whole day was delightful. And they're making it, they were learning about Mayor Baba. They were eagerly asking about Mayor Baba. It was you know, they'd never heard of anybody doing anything like that before. So that was fun for everybody. That was then they said, "Are you going to do it again next year?" I said, "Yeah, if it falls on July 10th, I will." And they even had me go through, or the whole group went through an inspection. And the lieutenant came by and said, "You got all your stuff?" Well, I hadn't. It was a lie. But I said yes. And he says, "Okay, no need to go into detail." He goes on to the next person. That was a lesson in obedience that was a real joy. It was a real joy. It changed my relationships with everybody in the Marine Corps. I went from being somebody who really had a kind of a piss poor attitude to somebody who was very well liked, and that was right. That continued. It continued to the next year, and the silence fell on July 10th the next year, and same sort of thing. They loved it. They took it very positively, and I was a very well-liked person. And when it came time for me to leave and finish up my obligation, they called me front and center, and it was a very informal ceremony. It was done in a formal way, but it was just something they'd come up with. Somebody made a little plaque. It said just "Little Me Underdog," and it was framed, and they had it in a paper bag, and they presented it to me like they would present a medal, you know, and I pulled it out and showed it to everybody, and they cheered. And they asked me at the last, they said, just, you know, I think I was Lance Corporal by that time. They said, "Lance Corporal Underwood, front and center." So I came up there, and they said, "Dismiss the troops." Well, everybody is dying to go home. It's Sunday afternoon, their last chance with their girlfriend for the weekend, which has been shot doing military drill. And everybody wants to get out of there and recover what little is left of the weekend. They're dying to go. I stand there and I don't know what to say, but I'm loving the moment. And one of them says, "Say, Baba bless you." So I held up my hand and I said, "Baba bless you." And they all laughed and chuckled, and then I said, "Dismissed." And they scattered like popcorn. And a few of them ran up at the last minute to shake my hand. So Marine Corps was hell for me. And it became almost nice. End of that story. It's just such a difficult moment to be forced to speak and not know whether you're breaking the silence or not. And Baba put me in that, you know. I found out about Baba in bits and pieces, and to tell all that would be unusually long, so I'll skip a lot of that. The main part of it was that I lived in Chapel Hill. I was a hippie. Some of my friends had been busted for drugs, rather serious offense at the time. Guy had done a couple of years, I think, on a road gang. But we were all kind of a community on the edge of the law. Well, we were all doing drugs. And a girlfriend of a guy who lived downstairs, she was suddenly friendly. I came up to my room after work and found that somebody had put a rose in a vase of water. And I thought, my God, who did that? And somebody told me later, Nancy put a rose in your room. thought, Nancy? That was even more surprising. I didn't think she paid any attention to me at all. So later on, Nancy came by and she said, you know, my heart is opening up. I'm experiencing love in my life. I think it's due to Mayor Baba. We'd both been hearing about Mayor Baba, where somebody had showed me a picture with his face on it, and they had told me that he had an ashram down in Myrtle Beach. And I was thinking, oh man, cold showers, white robes, sandals, vegetarian diet. I love it. I'd love to go down there and see that. You know, I didn't know. See, they told me he was alive in Myrtle Beach. And so, anything.
What year was it?
Probably 67. You know, anything that was exotic. I was brought up a Southern Baptist, and anything that wasn't Southern Baptist was interesting to me. But Nancy came up and said, Mayor Baba's been affecting the people that I've been associating with and affecting me, and I want to go. And I thought, well, I wanted to go too. Might as well go. So we took off. We took off at 11 o'clock at night, drove down through at that time were 2-lane roads in the South Carolina wilderness for hours and hours through the swamps, and where you were to see a mercury vapor light half a mile ahead on a long straight road. And we finally got down to Myrtle Beach just before sunrise. We looked for the Mayor's Center. We couldn't find it. And Nancy had a rough idea where it was, but she wasn't quite right on it. We ended up going down this 2-lane dirt road till we came to a big mud puddle. I was used to taking my car through mud puddles, but I looked at that one and I thought, no, we're not going to go through that. So we tried to sleep, and if you roll the windows up to keep the mosquitoes out, it got too hot. And if you roll the windows down, the mosquitoes came with it. So we were miserable. We finally decided, okay, we don't have much money, but we'll go down into town, we'll get a motel room. The guy at the motel room, this was probably about 5 o'clock in the morning, a little surprising to see people coming down at that time of day. And we slept until probably about 8 and felt refreshed, as if we'd had a whole night of sleep. We went over to Mammy's kitchen. Nancy thought of calling, and we found the number for the center in the phone directory, called up. Turns out our friends from Chapel Hill, Marshall Hay, Art Luster, were there on the center at that time, and they were sent down to collect us and guide us in. So we went to this. We were invited to the center, and we met Kitty Davy and Elizabeth Patterson. And Nancy took to it. She was very accepting. She had already decided that Mayor Baba was who he said he was. Well, I was not. In fact, the whole idea of being too accepting of things like that rubs against me, and it still does. I mean, I'm just not quite so eager to jump on that kind of a bandwagon. But she was happy, and I was kind of grumpy, and but I had a good time. And the weird thing is that Kitty and Elizabeth, in spite of my attitude, and obviously I was not a Baba lover and all that, they said, come back. You're welcome to come back. Oh, great, okay. Because it's such a cool place, and there's such cool people that are hanging out here. And it's just completely charming. So I think I went back about 4 or 5 times. And the rest of the story is kind of painful. I came back with a bunch of people, and this is how I came to Baba. I came back on the day, I think it was 68, that Mayor Baba had 2 silences. One of those silences, of course, the usual one was on July 10th, but this one was, the extra one was on the, I think it was the 20th of May. And Baba had asked us to say the prayers, Pravartagar prayer, I think once a day for a period of time leading up to that. And he said that on that day, something would happen that had not happened for millions of years. And I'm thinking, well, what better place to be at the scene of the action than the Mayor's Center? So we had made reservations for that day, and with a group of people. But the night before, I had gotten involved with some strong psychedelics, and the trip had not been pleasant. And it was, by the time the early morning had arrived of the day of going down to the center, I was pretty emotionally exhausted and just wanted to go to sleep. And I came over to my friend's house, who I was staying with, and he was outside. And I thought, well, this is early in the morning. What is he doing outside? Well, he says, have you forgotten we're supposed to go down to the Mayor's Center today? Oh, great. You know, I am in no condition to go down to the Mayor's Center. But in fact, I was feeling so ragged, I was really in a minor panic attack. I felt like the best thing I could do would be commit myself to the South Wing, the mental hospital at Chapel Hill, and just protect me from myself, keep me from doing anything extra crazy. I was just really, really at loose ends. But here I was being pressed with the obligation that I had committed myself to, and in my normal state of mind, I would have wanted to go to the Mayor's Center, but in this case I didn't. And nevertheless, I'd made a lot of promises, and it was quite complicated because some people had said that we had made a group, we'd filled up a car. Some people wanted to go, had backed out. Other people who found out about it later had signed in. And lost in all of this, especially at that time, was the fact that I'm supposed to, Kitty and Elizabeth had taken me for a pretty radical person and not to be entirely trusted. And they had made it clear to me that whoever, I should let them know who I was bringing and how many and all that. So I forgot. All I knew was that I was scheduled to be there, and some of the people that I planned to be there with, that I had told them about in the past, were with me, but there were others that I hadn't told them anything about. So somehow or other, as we drove down that long 4-hour, 4 hour drive to Myrtle Beach, things got lightened up. Slowly, I came out of this funky, burned out mood I was in, and we got there, and they were not happy to see me. None of the usual lighthearted happiness. I think Elizabeth, in her most stern, and she could be quite stern, she says, please come inside, just you. What? So I come inside. I knew there was trouble. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what. these other people were sitting in the car, and I didn't know how long I would. It was so different from the usual reception that I just didn't know what to make of it. She took me out on the back porch, and we had a long discussion. And basically, what they said was, if, you know, I told them, I said I'd been doing drugs the evening before, and they sort of said, do you still want to do them, or do you want to follow Baba, because you can't do both. And I said, I want to follow Baba. It's funny how that works. I never did drugs again. It was just like that. I just decided I had too much, had messed up my life too much, not done well with my academics. And these people that I was with now were quite positive and happy people. And I was honored to be in their company. When I met Kitty and Elizabeth, I knew nobody had to tell me who they were, what they were. They just were wonderful. They could see this without having to be told anything. Kitty especially was amazingly energetic for her advanced years. She was sparkling and happy and delighted to see us. So anyway, I decided they have pretty much forced me to decide whether I want to give up drugs or not. And then they said, well, what about all these other people that you brought with? I said, well, they said, are they doing drugs? I said, well, I don't know. Have they done drugs in the last 2 weeks? Well, I don't know. I don't know about all of them. Why did you bring them down here? And I thought, well, because this is the day Baba was supposed to do something that he hadn't done for millions of years. This was this very special occasion. And we all came down there for that. And they said, well, didn't you get our telegram? I said, what telegram? Aren't you at such and such an address, 331 Burlage Circle, Chapel Hill? I said, yeah. He said, well, we sent you a telegram. Well, I didn't get it. I said, well, then you were told to come on your own and not to bring anybody else. And here you are showing up in a car full of 5 other people. And what are we supposed to do? You're supposed to let us know if you're bringing anybody, and you were told not to bring anybody. Well, I didn't get the telegram. Well, that caused a sudden stop, and they looked at each other and they said, well, okay. They said, well, why? Then Elizabeth, she had a way. She said, well, don't you think about these? Aren't you considering these other people? They've been sitting out in the hot sun for the last 45 minutes. As if this was all my fault. And so invite them in and we'll get things straightened out. So they did. And at that time, you checked into the center through Elizabeth and Kitty. You went to Dilruba to get your key to the front gate of the center. There was no gatehouse. And that's how, so we got into the center and we got all our baggage separated and figured out who was staying in what cabin and which kitchen. And I think the only kitchen at that time was probably the original kitchen. Oh boy, it was a long, long, long day. And, but that's how I came to Baba, was deciding to obey. This story is about a trip to India. I'm not going to tell all the details because that would take too long. But I traveled with Dorothy Cassidy, And we got economy class seats to India. And when we got to Paris, things became really crazy. Dorothy is handicapped, generally has to be, she was on crutches at the time, but she has to be put on a wheelchair to get her anywhere fast around the airports. And they tried to separate us. Dorothy had polio and she has a metal in her body, so she sets off the detectors. And they have to search her. And she has to have a female to search her. That means that I don't go in there, and she doesn't like it if I'm not there. So they wanted to take her off into some section of the building and me in another section, and we didn't like it. They were just going to do this right away without asking us or telling us anything about it, and we both started squawking. So that began a long series of awkward misadventures in the Paris airport. And eventually we got processed to a certain stage, and the plane was being delayed and this and that. And they assigned two young kids, two boys, to kind of be our shepherds, our guardians, or whatever, as their guides to see us through the airport. And they set us down in a little room somewhere out of the main hustle and bustle, and the boys said, well, we'll be back in about 45 minutes. Don't worry, be happy. Oh, I've heard that before. Yeah, that sounds familiar. Ah, so Mayor Baba's behind all this. This is the headache that we're going through. This is all the confusion. So the kid has just basically told us this is in God's hands. Just sit tight. Well, 45 minutes is a long time when you're waiting, when you're expecting a plane to leave 30 minutes ago. And I'm thinking, this is not solving the problem. I've got to do something. I can't just don't worry, be happy. I've got to do something about it. We are going to be late. We'll miss our plane. What a headache this is going to be. So we left that little waiting room and went into the main terminal, which was a madhouse of confusion. And we came up to this poor man at a desk, and this gentleman was standing there with a line of maybe 300 antsy customers, travelers facing him, eagerly awaiting him to process their ticket or whatever. Poor guy all by himself. And I thought, I will never get through here if I go down to the end of 300 people far in the distance. I'll never get processed. I'm going to have to try to demand special attention. Well, I'm standing right there next to him, and he is, of course, pointedly ignoring me, as he should, because there's all these other people who got there first. And at that moment, another man steps with nice uniform, fresh, crisp, and he's also a ticket processor, and he steps right up there next to the other guy, and he turns to me in front of all these 300 other people. He says, "Can I help you?" Oh, well, yes, you can. It's just, there he is, they're there just to process my ticket. Well, that got the other people rather pissed, and one of them yells out, "Normally, one joins the end of the queue." And I'm trying to, I'm slightly embarrassed by it, but not about to change anything. So he gets the ticket processed, and have a boarding pass now, and you're supposed to put the boarding pass in a machine. The boarding pass is rejected. We put the boarding pass in the machine, and the boarding pass is rejected. And we put the boarding pass in the machine, and the boarding pass is rejected. This goes on about 5 times. Finally, the machine takes the boarding pass. Somewhere along the line, Dorothy, I believe, gets upgraded to first class. And she says, you can have it. You're more tired than I am. So we wait and we wait, and we finally are allowed to board the plane. She's got the first class, but she's given it to me. I don't know why. I eventually gave it back. Don't remember all the details, but I do remember that we got on the plane, both on the plane. She's up in first class, and I go to my seat in the economy class, and I sit down. And a man stands beside me in the aisle, and he looks at me with a glare, and he says, you're in J13. I said, yes, this is J13, showing him that, yes, I do have a boarding pass for this seat. And he says, well, I have J13. Okay, what to do? See the stewardess. So she comes up, and I said, we've got a confusion here. We both got the same seat. I stood up. He slides into the seat. She grabs my boarding pass and goes off hither and on into the bowels of the plane. And I'm standing there without any proof whatsoever that I'm even supposed to be on this plane. And I'm a little bit miffed, and the man, of course, looks like he's bolting himself down to the seat, you know. And she finally comes back and she says, I'm so sorry, sir, but we'll have to upgrade you to first class. So there we go. I get in my seat, I say something to my seatmate. I said, I have a friend who's in another seat. Would you mind switching? And blah, blah, blah. We switched, and Dorothy and I got the seats side by side and headed off from Paris to Mumbai. So we both got upgraded to first class. Rare indeed that happens, but that's a story. I was just talking with Robin about an old Baba lover that I traveled to India with, Ken Kaufman. Ken had a dog, a Labrador, named Jason, and that was a very wonderful dog. The dog and I got along very much, very happily together. I played with Ken's dog. I enjoyed Ken's dog more than he did, probably. And I remember one time Jason had a strong feeling of love about him, a sweet dog. And he came up, trotted up to me. I was sitting, and he just lay his head down on my lap. And it was sort of like laying your head at Baba's feet or something. It was kind of like an act of surrender. I'm giving you know, I belong to you kind of thing. Well, he didn't. It was not my dog. But Jason felt like that at the moment, I think. And I did too. And I was very happy that he put his head on my lap, and there was all that love between me and Jason. Many years later, I was talking with Erich in Mandalay Hall. It was just the two of us. We were sitting side by side, facing him somewhat. And as he was talking, I recalled Jason, and I recalled that he had come up to me just very spontaneously and put his head on my lap. Why? I don't remember what caused me to remember that while I was talking to Erich. He was talking to me. But I realized I could do that. and I don't need to wait for it. I just bowed down to Eric's lap and put my head in his lap. He was delighted. I heard him chuckle. He was, sort of, and he rubbed the back of my head. It had an amazing touch, that man did. Probably the best thing I've ever done in my life. Very spontaneous. I had not even thought about it. I could do that. I can do that. Right then. I remember that one time I had been in India and the visit had not been so pleasant. And I was disgruntled. Nothing had seemed to, maybe I wasn't really wholehearted in my obedience to Baba, or whatever. Things just hadn't worked. I had not felt like I was part of things, that anybody particularly was interested in me, or there were far more interesting other people elsewhere for everybody else. And so I was feeling like, well, okay, I've done this. I've been to India several times and I've enjoyed myself, but this is it. Don't think I'll be coming back. And so I got ready to leave, and that attitude, that mindset had not changed. And I said my goodbyes. And when I said my goodbyes to Monty, she came close and whispered in my ear. And I'm thinking, why is she whispering? And she says, you will return to India. And it really surprised me. I was thinking, well, I don't think so. But I'm also thinking, why is she whispering? Why did she say it that way? And I never really understood why she thought that, why she'd whispered. But eventually, as years passed, maybe I grew a little bit somewhere, whatever karma happened that made it possible. I decided, again, thanks to Ken Kaufman, that I would return to India. And so when I saw Monty again, I said, I have returned, wondering if she would even remember the conversation. Right on top of it, as if not 10 minutes had passed from the last conversation, which had been something like 8 years before. She says, by Baba's grace.